Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Kate Sanka speaking. I'm the executive director here at Teach Access, and I am thrilled to be joined by this wonderful group of people today who have graciously agreed to share their time, their insights, their knowledge with all of us and all of you, so that as we're working with our students, they know and know ways that they're able to make their technologies accessible. So the way that this will go, we have a few questions that will be asked of the group. I'll be helping moderate, move folks through the conversation. And with that, I think I'll start by having everyone introduce themselves, and I'll call on each of you to do that. And we'd love for you to introduce yourself and share how technology plays a role in your daily life. So, again, you'll introduce yourself and share how technology plays a role in your daily life. And with that, I think we'll start with Blake.
This is Blake. Technology plays a huge role in my life, and has for many years. I grew up with perfect vision and went through vision loss at the end of high school. And in that journey, I thought technology was my biggest frustration and enemy, as I had to relearn how to do so many things in high school and then in college. But I came to realize that technology is actually my best friend and a super powerful tool that allows me to keep up in life. My challenge isn't that I can't see things, it's that I can't do certain things, but technology is what allows me to do things and removes many of the barriers that people may think disability can create. And so much of my life is using my iPhone, my Mac, my iPad, and all sorts of other low tech devices, even whether it's my cane or sunglasses that help me adapt and navigate life, using the vision I do have in ways, and navigating around the vision I don't have. And it's also a hobby, a passion, whether it's using cameras or in sports. There's all sorts of technology I've experienced to adapt to life. Technology is a huge part of my life. Um, I got excited and jumped right into the question, but my name is Blake Steinica, and I am based in San Diego. And I'll pause there.
This is Kate. Blake, I love it. The technology enthusiasm is great. I think you're among friends here with that, and of course the faculty working with students as well. So thank you, Blake. And I will move now to Brianna, please.
Perfect. Hi, this is Brianna speaking. Brianna Weimer, I am a last year PhD student at the University of Notre Dame, but I am actually been working out of the University of Washington most of my PhD doing accessibility work. And so a lot of my research focuses on how can we give access to data to people with disabilities, looking at different diagrams or visualization so that we can increase participation across work and education. And so that's kind of been the biggest passion of mine is being able to put that out into the real world. And so how technology plays a role in my life, I think I forgot to say this actually. I'm a PhD student in computer science and engineering. So my entire life, personally and professionally, happens to be technology, whether it's coding, whether it's writing, whether it's honestly anything. My laptop is always next to me at all times of the day, for whatever I need to do.
This is Kate. Brianna, that's great. And hang in there for the last year. It's a grind, but the end is in sight, right? Thank you so much, Brianna. And Jesse, I'd love to go to you now for introductions and how you're using technology in your life.
Yeah, I'm Jesse. I've been paralyzed from the shoulders down for 30 years now, and I've been using technology for a long time. It started with the power wheelchair and voice recognition software, and nowadays I use a laptop and an iPad and an iPhone, and we can talk more about stuff in a second. but I did get my PhD in astrophysics. And right now I'm working with students over at Western Washington University on developing a autonomous wheelchair that will help people with the severest of disabilities get around more easily.
Thank you, Jesse. Great to have you here. This is Kate, and we will go over to Meryl to please introduce herself.
I'm Mary Kay Evans. I'm from Plano, Texas, and I am a speaker consultant focused on community usability and accessibility. I was born profoundly deaf and communicate through speaking, reading lips, looking at faces, and my bionic ear. I'm not fluent in sign language, which surprises people, but the deaf and hard of hearing community is diverse and many don't sign. Technology is woven into almost every part of my day. Caption, visual and haptic notification, reduce motion setting, dark mode, brightness setting, readable text across all my devices from computer to the phone. When technology is designed well, it expands my access and independence. When it's not, it creates friction or shuts me out before I even start. That's what my work is about, helping teams design for real people, not a default model.
This is Kate. Meryl, thank you so much. So glad to have you here. Okay, into our next question. And I'll go in the same order. So I'll ask for answers in the same order that we did introductions. So this question is, can you share an example or examples, but an example of a technology that works especially well for you and one that does not? And maybe what's the difference? What makes that difference between this is working really well for me and this does not? So we will start with you, Blake, please.
Awesome. This is Blake. The technology that jumps out to me that works very well are Apple products. And whenever people ask for examples of good accessibility examples, I will point to native Apple apps or products themselves. When my vision loss first happened, I was an Android user getting a new phone and was told that iPhones have better accessibility. And it's definitely a good example of products that have prioritized accessibility from the start. And I think in general, hopefully most people would agree that Apple products are more intuitive, simple, clean user experiences. And I think that really is due to a lot of the accessibility work, but also is an example of how user experience and accessibility play into one another. And what's most important to me as a screen reader and magnification user is good experience. So I would say across my iPhone, my iPad, those are super accessible, especially like the touchscreen factor. Um, I wouldn't say it's tactile, but it kind of is, in that you're able to touch the screen at least. So those are like some good examples, I would say. And when thinking of like a technology that's like harder to use or not a great example, I don't know how to best categorize it, but I would say websites and apps that have poor screen reader support. And that's a very broad category. But that's where like some of the biggest barriers are. And when I use a screen reader, I'm using shortcut keys on my computer to read out loud what's on screen. It's super difficult when websites aren't designed to have buttons that are labeled well. They don't use landmarks or heading levels to provide easy navigation. And it's technically difficult, but I think the biggest thing people don't realize is how emotionally frustrating it is. Um, and this screen readers themselves are hard to learn. And then when there's things that aren't designed well for screen readers, whether that was online simulators for homework in college, or not accessible course materials, or a new software I have to use in the workplace. It's incredibly difficult and frustrating, and uh, definitely the other side of the spectrum from the good user experience. Um, this is a technical thing, but it's a very human and emotional thing, and I think user experience can really make or break it.
This is Kate. Blake, I thank you so much for that answer. You had a lot of nodding heads and some knowing smiles, I would say, as you were answering that. And I think
Thanks for sharing.
yeah, I'm glad that you really highlighted the human aspect of it in your answer. I think it's fun to think about the technical stuff that we can do with technology that is cool and flashy. But in the end, if it doesn't work for the people using it, it's not that flashy, is it? So, thank you so much for that answer, Blake. Really appreciate it. And I'll go over to Brianna, please.
Perfect. This is Brianna speaking. So, an example of technology that works well for me and one that doesn't. I think that this is one of those questions where something with two swords at the end, right? So for me personally, it is going to be generative AI, or for instance, all the chat bots out there, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, whichever people like to use. And so for myself, as a person with bipolar and ADHD, ChatGPT, generative AI helps me so much with communication, organizing my thoughts, and just being able to put everything that's in my mind out there and actually have an opportunity to structure it and not having to do it by myself essentially and have to go through that whole process of figuring out what am I trying to say, what am I thinking. And then there's also some days where it can be hard for me to show up to work or show up to school and being able to actually communicate with people. And so thankfully, when I use like a chat GPT to just say, hey, I need something to tell people that I'm not like in the office today, or I need something to just be that bridge for me when I don't have the mental capacity to put myself first or to put myself forward to be able to actually accomplish what I need to do that day. But at least there's something in the background that can help me make sure that people know that it's not just me going MIA or disappearing from the world, for instance. And so then on the other side of things where it doesn't work well, now I think where I love it is when it's on a computer and I can actually like interact with it how I choose to and have that autonomy myself. But where it really makes things a little bit difficult is now all of the companies and the different vendors using ChatGPT or some type of generative AI when doing phone calls. And rather than talking to a real human being about what you're trying to look for or navigate or find out, or just if you want to change your flight or cancel a flight, and they make you go through the entire process of talking to some bot over the phone. And they always say, well, if you tell me more information, I can help you get there faster. But for some reason, they say that 4 times after you tell them, and it never gets you anywhere faster. And so, kind of similar to Blake on that aspect of just being such a frustrating user experience trying to get to something and do something that I have to get done. And it's just a barrier in its own self of just trying to get to the next part or get to a person to talk through it with or being able to accomplish what needs to happen, especially if I'm trying to fix a flight last minute or so. And so I think that's probably the more frustrating pieces of it when it's over a phone and I don't have the autonomy to choose how the conversation goes. I just have to sit and wait for whatever they're going to throw at me and hope that it doesn't take too much of the time out of my day.
This is Kate. Brianna, that's a amazing answer. And I think you've definitely touched on the old AI, right? That we're hearing about all the time. But this is part of the conversation that we hear a lot too, is there are things that are really great about it and useful and wonderful from an accessibility and disability standpoint. There are other things that are very scary or don't work well, and so I think you've really brought a good answer to that in terms of the nuanced ways that like it works well in this scenario, and I really appreciate it. Here, maybe not so much. So what impact does that have then on our future developers or future designers on how we move AI forward? We, the collective we, right? But thank you for that answer, Brianna. All right, Jesse, over to you, please.
Yeah, I have a really good example of two contrasting uh, technologies. I started out using the voice recognition to control a PC and appliances around my house. And I had to do that for the longest time, um, even though it was really inefficient. I was sort of stuck using it. And there was a couple problems. The first, I had to be tethered to the computer with a wired microphone. And and in order to move a mouse, I would have to say mouse grid, and it would split the screen up into 9 fields, and I would have to pick one, and then it would keep breaking it down into closer and closer until you were at the place where you want to be. And it was all that just to move into one spot. And I wanted to use that technology to draw, to make drawings using 3D CAD, computer aided design. And it took forever. So it took a lot of persistence. And then finally in 2011, head tracking became commercially available. If you look at my glasses, there's these reflective dots on the corners. That's so that a camera on my computer screen can track where I'm looking. So you'll see me move around my head sometimes. And that's just me moving my mouse around. And then I dwell on a certain spot, and that's how it clicks for me. So that boosted my efficiency greatly. And I have to second Blake on the Mac products. I use a MacBook and an iPad and an iPhone, and it's really helpful in my everyday life. And for most of my work, I do the head tracking because I can use it to operate a little typewriter. And but sometimes I still use voice recognition with the iPhone, and that's good, but it doesn't work in noisy environments. And that's the only downside. So you can have a decent technology, but it might not work in all environments. So that's just something to think about.
This is Kate. Jesse, appreciate those answers, and yeah, I think really just understanding the users and how technology is working and where there's those frustration, pain points. I don't use pain points, but frustration. And what is, is it taking so many steps to get to the place that you want that it's not even worth doing anymore, even if it is technically accessible. So I think having your insight is so helpful, all of your insights for that. All right, Meryl, over to you for technology that works and does not.
That is mirror caption, of course, are an example of something that works well. I use automatic caption on video platform every day and even upgraded my phone recently for a better captioning experience. When captions are accurate and stable, I can participate more. I've got both human and automatic captioning running here, one for speed, one for accuracy. Captions also have their downside. Automatic captions struggle with non-traditional accents like mine, which is a deaf accent, not somebody who can't speak English, and then background noise or people who speak fast. And sometimes they fail at the worst moment, like when my phone didn't caption the first few seconds of an important phone call. That moment of panic is real. Another example is motion. I keep reduced motion on all devices because animation, parallax effects, and auto-playing anything make it harder to focus and even sometimes make me feel sick. And I run into a lot of workflows that assume everyone wants to communicate through a phone call or a form that require a phone number with no alternatives. Those defaults exclude people before they even start. The difference between what works and what doesn't usually comes down to whether the design gives action. That means the difference between the good and the bad user experience, which can affect someone's day.
This is Kate. Meryl, I think that was an excellent summation for this question from everybody's answers, really. It's the um, what's being considered at the design stage, and not just considered, but integrated. What knowledge is being tapped into? Who's at the table? Who's working on these products and thinking about who the end user is? So, really appreciate everyone's perspectives on this question. Okay, now we're going to go into to another question that maybe overlaps a little with some of the answers that you gave. So we were just talking about technology that works well and doesn't. What we're curious about now, what are some of the most common accessibility barriers you encounter in everyday technology use? And I will go in reverse order. So we'll start with Meryl and go backwards. So while they're prepping to answer, what's really interesting for us in your answers for this question, are there things that are so common and it's like, why? We could just fix this if you did this, or if we thought about this, or, again, thinking about this is for um, faculty who are working with future students, what are you tired of seeing all the time? What are these common things that you're like, come on, everybody, let's address this. So, but would love to hear from all of you on the common barriers that you're encountering. And so, like I said, we'll go reverse order. We'll start with Meryl, then to Jesse, then Brianna, and to Blake. So, Meryl, take it away.
This is Meryl. Well, I mentioned these earlier. It's worth repeating because these barriers can lead to frustrating moments which can drain a person's energy and affect how the rest of our day moves. The most common barriers I run into are poorly generated captions or no captions at all. Another big one is the only workflows that only offer one way to do something. And I'm not just talking communication, I'm talking about when the way you enter or provide information and receive both ways. When I try to contact a company, it usually defaults to a phone call with no other communication option. Even when I start a tech support chat in chat, not chat bot, but a human chat. A lot of times they can't solve my problem and they'll want to escalate to a team that only does phone calls, or they'll ask me if anybody else in my house can take the phone call for me. And I am an adult. I've managed to buy a house, raise 3 kids. I think I should be able to handle these problems myself. And while these seem small, they disrupt the experience and affect how I feel about the company. And these barriers don't just affect my experience, they affect the data. When surveys, research tools, or feedback systems are inaccessible, disabled people can't participate. That means the data set is already incomplete before the analysis even begins. If we're not in the data, the conclusion will not reflect reality. It's like a 2,000-piece puzzle with one missing piece. And yes, that's happened. You notice the gap immediately. But with research, you don't notice that gap easily. That's the danger of inaccessible research. You make decisions without realizing a whole group of people is missing. Most exclusion isn't intentional. It happens when teams rely on defaults that were not designed for everyone.
Meryl, thank you for that answer. That was wonderful. I mean, it's not wonderful that that we experience these things, but your answer was a good answer for the question. You're laughing. Okay, good. Jesse, would love to turn to you now and hear some common accessibility barriers that you encounter every day.
Right. The biggest physical barrier to me is doors with some automatic button built in. So, it's well intentioned, but it's not good enough for me. And it's a problem that can be fixed. It's not that hard to do. All you have to do is extend the button down to floor level so that I can use the pedal of my power wheelchair to tap the button. Yeah. Otherwise, I can just I end up waiting in front of the door for somebody to walk by and open it for me. And that's kind of humiliating. Yeah. Mm, that's good.
Jesse, thank you. This is Kate, and thank you for sharing that. It's I think it relates a little bit to what Meryl was saying and Blake and everyone here around the autonomy piece. Meryl said, "Hey, I bought a house. I've raised children. I should be able to do these things, right?" I mean, this is it's similar to what you've just shared. Opening a door, you should be able to do that yourself. You shouldn't have to wait for others to show up at the same time or be going in the same door. And so the autonomy piece, I think, is so important and crucial in accessibility work. So thank you for sharing that example with us. Brianna, over to you.
This is Brianna speaking. And I think for me, there's a few barriers I could say that I see all the time that I wish people would think about a little bit. And I think the biggest one stems from, people forget how inaccessible the world is. And so a lot of my research in computer science education is centered on the visual information. And so one of the hardest things I face is just getting people to understand how much knowledge and how many concepts that they're trying to teach that's just left in a visual form, whether it's a diagram or a chart or an infographic. And we don't realize in that moment how many people were actually locking out of it. And I think the biggest problem is that a lot of folks, when they're creating their different slides or slide decks or resources or handouts, like they're very much so focused on the visual aesthetics of it. Of, for instance, if they're making a flow chart for class, they're focused on, oh, do I like this color to go with this color? Or do I like dashed edges with solid edges? And they forget the whole purpose of the diagram is just making sure that somebody understands a process. And so then when they're creating alt text, they don't walk through creating a long description the same way they thought about all their visual aesthetics that they added into their diagram. They're focused more so on just the compliant aspect of as long as there's alt text, it's okay. But compliance is not accessibility. And I think that's like the biggest thing to remember is when people are using visual information to share concepts or help people learn something, there is underlying information there that you want to share with the world. And I think people need to remember that while they're creating those visualizations so that they can put it into a different format so that more people can have access to that information. And I think the other part too then is when people are talking about visualizations or visual accessibility, a lot of people only think about, how this helps the blind and low vision community, but also it helps other communities as well because, a dense, complicated diagram can be just as inaccessible to neurodivergent people. It could be inaccessible to somebody without a disability because a lot of times when people do focus on that visual aesthetic and they're trying to convey something and they forgot the whole purpose and ideas that they're trying to put there, someone can look at a diagram and say, I have no clue which process I'm supposed to be following here. And it's just, it's on the author, it's on the content creator at that point for trying to put their information out there, but forgetting that at the end of the day, they're sharing information. It just happens to be in a visual form, and they forget that piece.
This is Kate. Brianna, I love that example, and I think um, mentioning how important it is to be explicit about what you want learners or the people, receiving that information, whatever it may be. I maybe designed the most beautiful, perfect thing I've ever seen in my life, and I put it out there. But if you don't know what it was I wanted you to learn from it, and I'm not being explicit, that's on me. in addition to it being inaccessible, likely contributing to that, if I want people to really understand that information or what's contained within there, just make it explicit. Add some additional descriptions there. And I think that's one of the way, I really appreciated all of the different communities that are included in when we make information explicit around diagrams or other things. Everybody can be on the same page. Um, Excellent. Blake, over to you for this question.
This is Blake. Could you real quick repeat the full question just to make sure I'm best answering it?
Absolutely. I would love to. Let me get to there. Okay. What are some of the most common accessibility barriers you encounter in everyday technology use?
Awesome. So I'll answer from kind of two perspectives, looking at this in the digital world of being a magnification and a screen reader user. And I'll get more technical for this answer. If we start with magnification uh, and try me using the screen visually with the peripheral vision that I have, I would say contrast is one of the biggest issues. I feel like there's been a trend of these white and light gray color palettes for years now. And even if sometimes those pass web content accessibility guidelines, contrast minimum contrast ratios, I still feel like the contrast is too low. I do use dark mode all the time, and that is a user preference as much as I think the world should be dark mode native. But if we're talking more of barriers that I think affects everybody, um, when it comes to magnification, I would also say distinguishing elements without color. When there's a link when there's a link or a button and it's only color that is distinguishing it rather than a box around it, some icon to let me know that it's clickable. That's another hard barrier with magnification. And then when it comes to using a screen reader, I would say uh, I wouldn't jump straight to alt text because I think that's the low-hanging fruit people always go to. I would first speak to labeling actionable elements, since a lot of the time images are not crucial to completing the workflow, depending on the context of what you're in. But it's what most of the time is more important is our links, buttons, menus, and other interactive items labeled, the name of that button or element, the role of the element, and the value if it has a certain state. Super important. And then a couple other screen reader things is focus order. If you're tabbing and moving around the screen, it's super hard. If buttons are out of order, you're jumping all over the page, or if you click on something and focus doesn't move or isn't announced to the screen reader, those are all like very difficult barriers to face, and can really just make the task much longer for a workaround. But these are a lot of areas, especially for using a screen reader, that they are blockers and you cannot complete the task. And others have spoken well to the challenge of when you have to ask someone else to do it, or it just becomes super frustrating. But I also don't want to give the idea that if you just checklist those things I shared, then everything is accessible. These are just some of the start, but I won't go too far into that point. But those are just a couple barriers that I could speak to.
This is Kate. Well, Blake, you will be able to go farther into that one because I think that ties in very well to our next question that I'll ask in a moment. But I think we'll do the same order for this question. So it'll go Meryl, Jesse, Brianna to Blake for this one. And so this question is, what do you wish more designers and developers understood about accessibility? What do you wish they knew? So we'll start with you, Meryl, please.
This is Mel. I wish more designers understood accessibility isn't about edge cases. It's about predictable human variation. People read differently, process differently, communicate differently. When you design for that range, everyone benefits. Besides, there are temporary and situational condition that can force people without disabilities to use accessibility. Many people who use accessibility, many people use accessibility and don't even know it. More than 80% of the people who use captions are not deaf or hard of hearing, even though captions were designed for the deaf and hard of hearing. Far more people who don't use wheelchairs take advantage of ramps. I use Zoom and magnification even though I don't have a reading or vision disability. It's because a lot of text is hard to read. I also wish more teams understood that accessibility isn't the same as being usable. Like Brianna said, compliance is not accessibility. Reduce motion, dark mode, caption, keyboard navigation, they all exist. But if they're hidden, inconsistent, or break the layout, they don't help. And defaults matter. If your default is motion heavy, bright white design, low contrast text, unformatted text, you've already excluded people before they even start. And finally, when inventors design for disabled people instead of with us and involve us throughout the entire process, not just the beginning, not just the end, they often create solutions no one wants. Either it's not a problem that needs solving or it's too expensive. Most famous example in the deaf community are the sign language gloves. Every friend who communicates through sign language hates those gloves. It puts the onus on the signer. They have to carry the equipment. I mean, it was not designed with them. It was designed for them. Accessibility isn't extra work. Inaccessible work creates extra work.
This is Kate. Meryl, that last line was so crucial. I think I'll put it on a t-shirt. The panel we had last week with the industry experts, there were some phrases that were on t-shirts. I think that one is a great one. Inaccessibility creates extra work. That is the thing. All right, Jesse, over to you, please, on things you wish more designers and developers understood about accessibility.
Um, First of all, a lot of the background work has already been done in the computer science realm. You just have to start implementing it more intelligently. And Merrill already used one of my favorite examples with the ramps being a lot more useful than to just people in wheelchairs. Even kids with the skateboards and the roller skates will take the ramp rather than the stairs. And who doesn't love the automatic doors at the grocery store? Yeah, everybody takes advantage of those. So, yeah, I think just people need to, and also, uh, another good point that Meryl was making, it's really much better to think about accessibility from the start rather than trying to figure it out in the end.
Thank you, Jesse, for that. I like the image of the skateboarders and the roller skaters, rollerbladers. That's a good one. Usually it's yeah, I think about grocery stores or folks maybe pushing a cart of some sort or a stroller or whatever it may be. But now you have me thinking the skateboarders. I'm going to add that to my repertoire. Brianna, over to you, please.
Perfect. I think Meryl had a lot of great responses to this question because I was thinking as well, like Jesse, with the curb cut effect, talking about ramps and as much and captions for that instance. And so I think even I would say if there's something I want designers and developers to understand, I know I said it a second ago before, but I'll expand on it. Of compliance isn't accessibility. Compliance and equal access are not the same thing. So, for instance, compliance might ask, can this person technically get to the information? But, equal access and accessibility asks, are they getting the same quality of experience, the same depth of understanding, in the same amount of effort as everyone else? it's easy to pass an accessibility audit and still leave somebody with a worse, slower, more frustrating version of the same thing. And that's the part of why accessibility is an equity problem for the world, because that's the purpose. And so when people think about just going for the compliance angle, they're missing out on so much just passing information out to the world and being able to communicate with more people inside of the world. And so even going back into my own world, into my own work, for instance, if somebody has a bar chart displaying, how many students are enrolled in a semester, and they're trying to help people understand more, every single year it gets a little bit more people joining the program. But if an alt text or a small description, all it says is chart showing data, somebody is missing access to what that chart is actually trying to communicate to the world. But sometimes designers and developers will just see, well, they've got the box checked off. And sometimes I think a lot of people think, that if they do accessibility, it's just for a small community of focus, but, like the curb cut effect, like captions, like wheelchair ramps, when you help in a specific population, you end up building something accessible for everybody. And I feel like that should be the purpose of what we're doing, especially in education, is making sure everybody has access to what we're trying to teach so that the opportunities that education brings can actually flourish.
That's a great answer, Brianna. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you brought it back again to compliance may mean that it's technically accessible, but it isn't a delightful experience. If I can accomplish something by tabbing, if I have to tab 20 times to do it, that's annoying. I mean, yes, technically I can do it, but that's annoying and I don't want to do that. So I think that's such an important piece that, yes, there's the compliance, but that doesn't mean it's going to be fun or enjoyable or that I'm going to want to do that. So I'm really, really glad you brought that back into the conversation. All right, Blake, over to you for what you wish designers and developers would know or understood about accessibility.
This is Blake. I think a lot of accessibility conversations revolve around design and development, which makes a lot of sense, and that's a huge impact. But what I wish just product teams understood at a high level is um, the role product managers play in accessibility. And sometimes we shift accessibility left just to the point of design, but I think shifting it further to the point of product requirements and knowing that sometimes we jump from designers is shifting left or leadership, but I think product managers are in the middle, setting product requirements, making sure that there's representation in research, that there is accessibility as part of requirements for design, into handoff into development, that there's accessible tooling being used, that testing is being done, and making sure accessibility is not just a function of stages of the product lifecycle, but the full product lifecycle, I think is super important. And this is maybe speaking, more towards a larger enterprise scale, but also if we think on the micro level, I think uh, shifting from the concept of shift left, but to more of a rapid feedback loop and rapid prototyping, or just constantly getting feedback from real people with disabilities is super crucial. And then the one other angle I would want to speak to that I wish people um, better understood when it comes to accessibility is accessible. And this, I may be getting a little too hot take here, but I would say accessibility is a constraint. Um, I often hear it said the other way, but I think constraint is a good word that can make us more creative. And I would say product requirements are constraints, and it makes you be mindful of what you are building. Um, and not all limitations are bad. They help create better things. And accessibility can be challenging, which is a good thing and creates more innovations. Innovation is not easy. Good user experience is not easy. Um, and sometimes accessibility can be tech debt, and that's not very flashy, but that is contextual to the team. but it is a crucial part of the process to get towards making products that are more enjoyable user experiences. And there is so much back end work that goes into getting to wherever someone is at to where they want to be and creating good user experiences. So much of this advice is very contextual, but those are some things recently on my mind that I wanted to put out there.
This is Kate Blake. I think that's an excellent answer. And again, you got some head nodding and some smiles with that. So I do want to pause and see if anyone wants to reply to his hot take. Although I don't know that it was considered too hot by the folks, but want to see by the other panelists. Want to see if anyone does want to add anything, maybe to any of the answers anyone has at this point. Okay. With that, I think we'll head into our last question that we have, which Blake, I'm gonna reverse the order again and go with our first order. So we'll go Blake, Brianna, Jesse, Meryl for this one. And you actually kind of mentioned it, touched on it, hit on it, whatever phrase we want to use for the question you just answered. But the question is, why is it important for people with disabilities to be involved in the design and testing of technology? And really, I think all of you have spoken to this in some way or another in your answers, but we want to make sure we make it very clear why it's important, and maybe the impact it can have, or however you'd like to take your answer. But Blake, I will go to you for this one first.
This is Blake. I love this question, and I think it's so crucial. It's something that I wish just had such an obvious answer, or more so as a rhetorical question, when it comes to making things that are accessible. Of course, you would want to be working with the end users of it. If you are building construction tools and you're not a construction worker, I would assume that you're going to speak with construction workers. Random example. Um, but I think if I look at the flip side, the risk of not working with people with disabilities for development, for testing, is you can solve for the wrong problem, or you could solve the right problem with the wrong solution. Um, and I would also say that people with disabilities shouldn't just be testers. Um, and that I think the biggest thing is hiring people with disabilities, and is would be one great goal, but also throughout the entire process, don't just create something and then give it to people to test. Bring people with disabilities in for innovation. Um, and not to provide overwhelm, but and think that you have to have a huge sample, but there's such a spectrum of disability within each different category, within each assistive technology. There's a spectrum of vision loss, there's a spectrum of screen reader users, and not that you'll be able to solve uniquely for all of them, but just know that not all people with disabilities and subcategories are created equal. So those are just a couple things I'd say, but definitely an answer I could go on for a long time about.
This is Kate. Like, I actually think your construction example was so good. I mean that what a succinct way to make that point. So, um, maybe not random, maybe very appropriate, because I wouldn't want someone who doesn't know about construction building my house, for example. That could end not well for me. So, I appreciate that example. Brianna, over to you. Anything you'd like to add on this question?
Yeah, this is Brianna speaking. And so I think there's two important distinctions also to bring up here, whether it's designing, testing products for everyone, or when people are designing assistive technology specifically for a disability group. And so for both of those, why it's important to involve people with disabilities is, well, I think the one that we touched on a lot is, when designing assistive technology, it's a waste of everyone's time to build something without the people you're building it for. Why make assumptions about a community when you can just ask the community? You spend a lot of time, money, engineering on a solution to a problem that people just don't have, while the actual problem still gets untouched by them. And I think if I had to then throw out something that I probably could have said last question about that designers and developers should know, and I wish more people maybe would understand about that, is disability communities are so much more open and welcoming than people expect. I think a lot of designers and developers, they might hang back because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing or using the wrong word, asking a question that might come off as ignorant. So they end up avoiding the conversation entirely, which is still the worst possible outcome. But in my experience, these communities have been remarkably generous with people who genuinely want to learn and understand their problems. You don't have to show up already knowing and understanding someone's experience. You just have to show up wanting to and have that willingness to ask, to listen, to be corrected without getting defensive. That matters far more than arriving with perfect knowledge. And then now on the other side of things, when people are just building any technology, for instance, Apple building out a laptop or so, accessibility and designing and bringing people with disabilities into that conversation, it's because this isn't just a product built for a disability community. The mistake is thinking kind of what Meryl was saying earlier about accessibility being edge cases. Sometimes people might think accessibility is a special feature you add when disabled people are target users, but in reality, disabled people are users of everything. They use the same banking apps, the same checkout flows, the same maps and messaging tools as everyone else. And so if you're building something for a general user, disabled people are already in that group, whether you tested with them or not. And so that's why it's kind of just an important thing of, are we building something that people will use? And if the answer is yes, then some of those people will be disabled. And so it's up to us to find out where it breaks for them now, or where we can fix it, or find out later. And at that point, you're just putting out an inaccessible item into the world without considering a large audience that's using what you're building anyway. And so I think that's like the kind of both ways of where people with disabilities need to be involved throughout the entire process of when it comes to any technology that's out into the real world.
This is Kate. Brianna, I love that answer, and I'm kind of hoping Meryl might in her answer in a moment. She's wearing a shirt that says progress over perfection, and this is one of the things that she often is talking about. And I think that has a tie into what you were saying um, around awareness and being scared, maybe, to work with the disability community and how do we approach that? And what are the ways that we get started somehow, right? And that made me think of Meryl's phrase. So hopefully, maybe she'll share a bit more about that in a moment. But thank you for that answer, and we'll go over to Jesse for this one. So. Why is it important for people with disabilities to be involved in design and testing, or like Blake said, at any point throughout? I'll go over to you, Jesse.
Yeah, this is Jesse. Um, I appreciate being involved in the testing process and the design process. I the, the first time I got involved was in 1998 when I was an intern at NASA, and I wanted to be able to reverse without bumping into things in my teachers' offices. And so they helped me um, create a backup camera for my wheelchair. And throughout the years, I expanded upon that, putting more and more devices onto my power wheelchair. And throughout that time, I've had a lot of assistance with that. And these days, I work with students over at Western Washington University, and we're going to get to the point pretty soon where I'll be able to test some of the applications that they've been developing. And uh, if I can use it, then anybody will be able to use it. So it's usually good criteria.
This is Kate. Jesse, thank you for that. And I love your first example. And I think we'll have to have another conversation about your days at NASA. What were the cool things that you've gotten
Mhm.
into there? Thank you for that one. And Meryl, over to you.
It is mere the lived experiences of disabled people shape better program, project, and product when we're involved early and throughout the entire process. Too often we're brought in for one part of the process and the outcomes reflect that. There was a podcast made for the deaf and hard of hearing, and they were bragging about it. Supposedly, it included the deaf and hard of hearing community, and I questioned that because the result was sickening. It was almost like parallax design with motion and bright yellow colors. I showed it to a lot of people, and many couldn't tolerate it. Is this an example of progress over perfection? I don't know. That's a tough one because it was so bad. But on the other hand, they were thinking about it. But it shouldn't be a separate podcast just for the deaf and hard of hearing. It should be part of your whole podcast. It's like designing two solutions. While doing training, I showed some slides with different text and background color combination. I asked the students if they thought the color contrast between the color pairing, path compliant. They were shocked at some that passed because they found it hard to read. Also, I read a story about a disabled woman who took 45 minutes to plug in her wheelchair every night. A group of high school students designed with her, not for her. And in 6 days, they co-designed a solution that let her do it in 20 seconds. That's the power of designing with people, not for disabled people. Accessible design isn't disability design. It's usable design that enhances experiences for everyone. But I know it's overwhelming. There's so much. There's a lot to learn. And that's what I encourage the progress over perfection mindset to come in and just get started, and don't be afraid. Yes, it'll be awkward, you'll make mistakes, but if you work with people with disabilities, with them, not for them, you can overcome them faster. And it's also important to understand accessibility is part of good engineering, not an add-on.
Meryl, thank you for that answer. I think all of you have shared just some incredible insights. I think things that will hopefully be very useful for our faculty to keep in mind, as well as students. So thank you all for all of your insights and your knowledge. I'm going to pause for a second and see if our attendees have any additional questions we might ask. We have a few minutes left here. Let us pause for a moment. Anyone in our audience have additional questions? Let's see. Okay, there is one question that I will read out, and it is also in the chat for our panelists to take a look at. And then I'll give you a few seconds here to consider an answer. And not everyone has to answer this one, so we can go to, if you'd like to offer something, please feel free to indicate to me in some way that you'd like to offer an answer to this one. So the question here is the industry panel. So I mentioned last week we interviewed, or similar, I should say, a panel of about 4 industry folks who work in varying types of organizations, but they are on the accessibility teams for these large companies like Verizon, Cisco, Salesforce, and the fourth one that is not coming to my mind right now, but another big one, ADP. Thank you. So big organizations, right? So these are the folks doing accessibility work within. And they were being asked about the importance of accessibility in their work and what that looks like and all of that sort of thing. So with that context, the question here, the industry panel talked about the limitations of thinking about disability in separate air quote buckets, end of air quote, since many people have multiple disabilities or intersecting access needs. Anything anyone would like to share related to that? I see Meryl's hand. So Meryl, if you're ready, I can go to you. And then I think I saw Brianna, but yeah, okay. Meryl, you want to get started here?
So I get the idea of I rely on caption and seeing faces when I'm on video meetings like this. And but I have friends who can't use camera, whether it's because of an anxiety issue or if it's because of their disability. So the thing is, we have to compromise. I mean, luckily we have a chat, we have the caption, so we have multiple options. And I think that's really important to always offer multimodal solutions. And because you always have clashing dark and night mode, for example, just to give you a very simple example. I have to have dark mode, they have to have long night mode. Virtually, it's pretty easy to design solutions so I can choose and they can choose. So it's all about offering options. But I know it's a challenging question because I have been in a deaf conversation with deaf people across the spectrum that included someone who was deaf and blind, and the requirements were a bit trickier to work with. And so it was getting really difficult. But the key is, as we mentioned earlier, all of us, is to design a whole experience rather than trying to divvy it up like the example I gave earlier.
This is Kate. Thank you for that, Meryl. And I think it was Brianna who mentioned it, being or someone did. I'm sorry if I'm misquoting who it was, but someone mentioned, being open to the feedback. So you try something, in all of these great examples you've given, you do your very best, and you know that it's probably going to need to be adjusted still. And when faced with that question or that request from someone who, intersecting disabilities, multiple disabilities, that how do you receive that feedback, and what is the way that you move forward with that and keep changing and improving the work that you're doing. So I think that's an important piece of it too, is how do you receive the feedback when you're like, I tried, and I kind of got it a little bit wrong in this scenario. Okay, let's take another try. um, with that, Brianna, was there something you wanted to add for this one as well?
Yes, yes. This is Brianna speaking. And so I think it's such a fun topic thinking of like the intersecting access needs. I think this is, I'll be completely honest, intersectionality, it is genuinely hard to design for. We can't anticipate every combination of access needs. There's so many, and some of them that we don't even know, some of them pull against each other. And so, what might help one person can create a barrier for another. And so I don't want to pretend that there's a clean solution to that answer because there isn't. But I do think that the way to approach it or to think about it is one of the things that Meryl had said too with that multimodal design. And so instead of trying to predict exactly every single accommodation a person might need, you build the information out in multiple forms and give somebody the opportunity and the autonomy to choose how they want to access that information or interact with that information, coming up with the idea of the design that allows somebody to choose the path that works best for them. And so then we getting to that point as designers and developers, we stop designing for people which bucket they belong in, and then we give them just the options to access it, however their particular combination of need requires. And then the other part of it is also just being open to the idea of conflicting access needs as well. And so, for instance, my lab at the University of Washington, now we're comprised of people with various types of disabilities. And so something that we go through every single year is assessing what are the access needs for the group this year, because there could be somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing, somebody who's blind in the lab, somebody who may have a very specific neurodivergent condition. And it's just, coming together as a group of people and saying, how do we do this together? How do we make sure that nobody has a barrier that's essential, or nobody's having a solution that does create an additional barrier for somebody else, because we are managing all of our different access needs together. And we all have the same goal and motivation of this is a lab meeting. We want to be able to communicate with all of each other. We want to share information. We want to be able to address people. And it's just the idea of being open about it and having that conversation in those moments of like, how should we do this that benefits everybody, and being able to listen to all the different voices in the room and figure out the best solution forward together, at least.
This is Kate. Brianna, I love that answer. I think the community aspect is such a key part of all of this work, and really like that your lab does that. That it comes together, that you all come together and work together to figure out what's the most um, sort of accessible way for us to work together over this semester or this term. So I really that's a really interesting and cool example. So thank you. Anyone else want to offer anything here, or we can work to close out?
I'm just
Yeah.
appreciative of the panel. This is Jesse. And we've only been talking for an hour and a half or so. And I feel like I've made some new friends. And I'm really grateful that you included me.
This Kate, Jesse, thank you. I really appreciate that and feel the same. Thank you for that comment. Okay. I think with just the few minutes we have left, so um, one thing that I asked to the other panel, and it occurred to me that maybe you all would like to share as well, and I'll have drop Rolando, who's doing behind the scenes for us. He's on our team. Yes, if okay, yes. So he's dropped it into the chat. So I will read it as well and give another moment. So as we wrap up, what words of encouragement or advice would you give faculty who maybe are just beginning to teach about disability or digital accessibility? So what would you want to share with them around, hey, getting started in teaching these topics to their students? What would you want to tell them? Again, could be a word of encouragement, some advice, or just recommendation, whatever the word may be. So let me pause for a moment. And then likewise, if you'd like to answer, feel free to indicate in some way.
Yeah, it's Jesse speaking.
Yeah,
Just like I said, it's really appreciated the work that you guys are doing, and that includes the faculty, of course. And I just keep up the good work. Thank you.
this is Kate. That's a good one, Jesse. Just a reminder that you're all part of this now, right? And just keep on going. We're on the path together. Thanks for that, Jesse. Yeah, Brianna.
This is Brianna. I think if I had to put into a very succinct way for a second, my advice to them would be don't be afraid to be a student again. You know, if you're just starting to teach this or understand accessibility, you're going to hit edges of what you know fast, and that can feel uncomfortable, especially when faculty are used to being the experts in the room, especially in their classrooms when they're the ones teaching. But accessibility, it's a field where the real experts are often your students, the disabled people in your community, or just the people living it every single day. And so I think it's really important to remember at that point, like not only should you try to be a student again, but you're allowed to be a student again. You're allowed to not know what's the right answer and to still raise your hand and ask the questions. You know, it's showing your students what it's like to learn in public, to ask, to be corrected, to update, and to keep learning and keep going. And I think that's a very big thing that sometimes people forget to do after you get to a certain level of teaching, that to accept that you don't know all the answers. And it can also be fun again. I mean, that's why they probably ended up being in education sooner or later. They enjoyed the learning aspect. So this is a new opportunity to embrace it all over again.
This is Kate. That is an amazing answer, Brianna. I love that. The lifelong learner, don't be afraid to be a student. Keep learning. Things change all the time in this field, as we all know. And that's kind of exciting that it's not the same thing every single day, and to think of it that way. So I love that. Incredible. Meryl or Blake, just want to make sure we get to you if you'd like to share. No pressure.
Meow, I'm just, my heart just full because you're talking about teachers being lifelong learners. My sister of blessed memory who passed last year, her tombstone, she was a professor in her last job before she passed, and her tombstone says lifelong learner. So I truly, appreciate that because as teachers, we should always want to learn. And I want to add that when students learn to design for human variation from the start, with disabled people in the room, they build better technology for everyone. And again, engineering accessibility is just part of good engineering design and adopt a progress over perfection approach. You can't learn it all in one day. We didn't learn how to walk in one day. It took a lot of stumbles before we got there. And some of us had to claw first, that kind of thing. Not everybody. It's different for everyone.
This is Kate. Meryl, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's really, yeah, really, really special to think about it as lifelong learning and for your sister as well. But yes, thank you for sharing that. Blake?
This is Blake. There's so much I could say for this, but a couple of practical things would just be expose yourself to people with disabilities and expose yourself to assistive technology. Um, when it comes to people with disabilities, uh, I don't know all the rules behind how you could actually do this, but I would say engage your students with disabilities. In high school, I had a genetics class, and we talked about the genetic condition I have in the section on mitochondrial genetic conditions. That's not an accessibility thing, but I thought it was really cool to like feel known in the class. And there were other classes where I had to share about my assistive tech just because for whatever reason in the class. But I think if it's computer science classes, I really think any professor could be incorporating this. If there's students with disabilities, if there's people on campus with disabilities, bring them in, hear someone's story, start the conversation somewhere. There's so many areas you can go deep on accessibility. Um, it can be overwhelming, but sometimes you just gotta pick one. And then with technology, whatever technology you use, there's all sorts of native accessibility features that I think are fun to just poke around with. So those are just a couple of areas I'd encourage people to start checking out.
Hey, Blake, thank you for that. And I think, yeah, if you aren't sure where to start, of course, here at Teach Access, we can help point you in the direction of resources, just like Blake was saying. If you don't really know where to go, to be in community, or to be in contact with and work with the disability community, although no one has shared the stat yet, so we have to, at least 20%, probably more, of the population in the US has a disability. So it's likely that there are students or your colleagues around you who have a disability. So there are it's a wide group of folks that are around, but without just kind of putting the call out there saying, "Hey, please come and talk to me." There are resources available and groups we can help connect you with. So want to offer that. But yeah, I just want to thank everybody for your time today. Have had some really wonderful insights, some helpful knowledge that I think faculty will be able to carry with them as they move forward. And so thank you all for your time here today and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
So
Have a
thanks
good
so
one.
much.
Thanks.